Hello, welcome back. Recently, I've come across many instances on social media of people saying things like, no is a complete sentence. It is usually presented as a symbol of strength and independence and healthy boundaries. The idea here is that a person should be able to refuse something without having to explain or justify themselves. And on the surface, it is quite reasonable. Many people struggle to say no with refusing others, especially those of us who have been conditioned to prioritize others' needs before our own. In such situations, learning how to say no is an important step ahead in our own well-being. However, this line, no is a complete sentence, I think it's traveled a bit beyond its original intent. When we begin to use it in all sorts of different contexts, I think it begins to distort how healthy boundaries actually work. To understand the issue properly, we need to begin with the original context where this all started. Therapists and counselors have worked for ages with those of us who are not able to say no, or those who feel compelled to defend or explain or justify themselves each time they feel like saying no. These people usually carry a deep fear of disappointing others. They may say yes to commitments which exhaust them, which might be against their values, or they might tolerate behavior that makes them feel uncomfortable. For such people, the problem is not a lack of empathy, but maybe too much of it. Because their emotional orientation is outward, they worry so much about how others might feel that they neglect their own needs. In these situations, the sentence or the phrase that no is a complete sentence, it serves as a reminder that I don't really need to justify myself, defend myself. Just saying no is really enough. It tells us that we are allowed to refuse, decline, without the need to defend ourselves. Now, this context is important because this phrase was never meant to be universal in context. It was never meant to be universal rule for all communication. It was a corrective tool aimed at a specific behavior pattern. The message was not that explanations are unnecessary in relationships. And unfortunately, that is where I see it being used so much of the time. The message was that a person is not obliged to defend or justify their autonomy each time they feel like exercising it. The distinction here is subtle, but it is important. Autonomy and communication are not enemies. Healthy autonomy simply means that the final decision rests with me. That's it. It does not mean that relationships should operate without clarity or dialogue. But once this phrase moved out of therapy rooms to social media, things changed. That nuance disappeared. It became an excuse. And as you know, social media thrives on little slogans, catchy little things. A complex psychological idea begins to get compressed into something perhaps even distorted and almost designed to resonate with emotions that really need to be a little more resilient. What was originally meant to serve as a tool to help with a person's sense of empowerment now seems to have become a general rule for communication in general, and that is where the problem begins. In quite a few online discussions, you'll find that refusing to explain yourself is seen as a sign of strength. The ability to shut down an entire conversation with a single word is portrayed as emotional maturity. If someone asks for clarification, the request itself is portrayed as an attempt to manipulate. In this framing, the person who does the refusal is seen as self-respecting and assertive. While the person who's trying to understand the other person a little better is seen as trying to control or as being intrusive. And this interpretation reshapes our understanding of boundaries. Instead of being tools to manage healthy relationships, these sort of boundaries become mechanisms to actually avoid having a real relationship. Real boundaries aren't silent. And a boundary is not just a refusal. A boundary is a statement about limits. A boundary clarifies what is acceptable and what is not. What one is willing to do and what one is not willing to do. Most importantly, it provides information to the other person about the structure of the relationship. It gives them data, information. It empowers them to understand us better. When a boundary is communicated clearly and the other person understands it, it helps them adjust their own behavior. Instead of just slamming into a wall. And when they don't have that clarity, then they just have to guess. And when people guess, they assume, they misunderstand, they feel tentative, they don't feel secure, and it leads to resentment and ultimately the deterioration of relationships. Of course, there's a whole lot of conflict that goes with it. Let's start with a very simple example. A friend invites you over and you say no. Or, can you come here? And you say no. The message is clear. You are not attending. But the relational meaning remains a little unclear, ambiguous. Are you unwell? Are you busy? Are you upset? Do you dislike the event itself? Is this something temporary and not really anything serious, or is this a sign of something bigger? No one knows. As human beings, we have a tendency to fill in the gaps with information. And in many cases, the imagined information is far worse than the real reason. What could have been resolved and explained and clarified with a single sentence of context becomes an emotional puzzle for the other person. This is why communication plays such an important role in healthy relationships. Relationships are not contracts between strangers. Relationships are ongoing interactions between people who influence each other's emotions. And we will agree that clarity does reduce friction. When people are able to understand the reason behind a boundary, they are better able to respect it and observe it. Even comply with it. The explanation does not diminish a boundary. It strengthens it. It strengthens it by making it understandable. There is also a deeper psychological dimension to consider here. As human beings, we are social creatures, and we rely on shared understanding on shared meaning. When we communicate our decisions, we are not just transferring a little information. We are actively maintaining trust. And trust is built not just through reliability, but through transparency. When someone consistently refuses to explain their decisions, then other people begin to feel excluded from that relational space. And over time, that relationship begins to feel less like a cooperative bond and more like a series of unilateral announcements. How long do you think that relationship is going to last? This does not mean we need to justify all of our decisions or our requirements. There is a difference between providing context and being defensive. A defense implies that the other person has the right, or is being given the right, to judge whether your decision is valid. Context simply helps them understand what the heck is going on. The difference can be illustrated through tone and intention. Saying something like, "I can't make it tonight because I need some quiet time." This communicates a boundary while maintaining some relational warmth. It does not invite negotiation unless the speaker allows it. Another point to remember is that boundaries exist within systems of reciprocity. In any ongoing relationship, both people are going to need some degree of clarification from the other at some point or the other. One day you might be the person setting the boundary, and at other times you might be the person seeking clarity. If both people decide to set up a rigid stance of no is a complete sentence, then gradually there's no elasticity, no communication, no information, and that relationship becomes more of a word than actually having any meaning. Because over time the conversations begin to disappear. They become shorter. Explanations fade away. They're not there anymore. With explanations, I'm speaking specifically of clarifications, information. And the misunderstandings begin to pile up. The relationship might survive, but the emotional bond begins to become a little thin. Now let's take a look at why this slogan, "No is a complete sentence," why does this resonate so strongly with people? Many of us today, we feel quite overwhelmed by social demands. Work pressures, digital communication, constant connectivity give us a feeling that our time and presence and all that is constantly being demanded, being claimed by others. In such an environment, the promise of a simple protective rule becomes so attractive. That phrase offers us a psychological shortcut. Instead of navigating the complexity of interpersonal interactions and relationships, we start withdrawing. And this withdrawal is avoidance, but we think it is empowerment. No is a complete sentence. The problem with shortcuts is that they come with hidden costs. Avoidance does provide relief, but it does not help us build the skills required to sustain relationships. Learning how to say no while being respectful, empathetic, and so on, is a demanding skill to develop. But it lasts long. It is durable. It requires self-awareness, empathy, and the willingness and ability to tolerate small amounts of discomfort over time until we build this skill. And these are also precisely the qualities that allow relationships to last long. Now, having said all that, there are, of course, situations where an explanation is unnecessary and perhaps even unwise. If we are dealing with harassment, coercion, or constant disrespect, we are not under any obligation to engage in dialogue. In such circumstances, no is indeed a complete sentence, no doubt about that. The same applies when interacting with strangers or with people who have repeatedly demonstrated that they will misuse any information that they are provided. Then yes, no is a complete sentence. No doubt there again. Boundaries do sometimes need to be firm and minimal in order to be effective. But my point here is that these situations are the exception, not the general rule for everyday relationships. When we're dealing with friends, partners, colleagues, family members, and other good faith relationships, communication remains the foundation of respect. If you offer a brief explanation, we aren't really surrendering our autonomy. We are merely acknowledging that relationships work best when all the people involved understand each other. That's that. Another reason this phrase can be misleading is that it tends to portray boundaries as isolated events rather than as ongoing processes. Boundaries evolve over time. As relationships grow, needs change, circumstances change. And maintaining those healthy boundaries therefore requires continuous communication, or at least consistent. We renegotiate expectations. We clarify misunderstandings and adapt to each other's new realities. But if our communication style is no is a complete sentence, that doesn't leave a lot of room for understanding to begin with, let alone re-understanding and adapting that understanding. Yes? From a broader perspective, relationships require two fundamental human needs to be balanced: autonomy and connection. Autonomy allows us to remain true to ourselves. Connection allows us to experience belonging and mutual support. The problems arise when one of these is pursued at the expense of the other. Excessive autonomy can lead to isolation, while excessive connection could lead to self-neglect. The art of relationship maturity is being able to maintain both of them simultaneously. And boundaries are one of the tools that helps to maintain this balance. When we use boundaries wisely, they protect autonomy and preserve connection at the same time. The protection, the preservation comes from the ability to decline requests that might violate our values or limits. The preservation comes from communicating those limits in ways that others can understand and respect. And in that sense, the healthiest boundaries become not those that are the shortest, but actually which are the clearest. So what I am saying here is not to discard that slogan, but to reinterpret it. The useful part of that phrase is a reminder that all of us have the right to refuse. There's no doubt there. We are not required to justify our existence or our value systems or our decisions. The basic ones, shared ones, of course, need to be discussed. But the missing bit in that slogan is a perception that explanation is entirely unnecessary in every context. Quite a bit of the time, explanations are what allow autonomy and connection to coexist. Suppose I said, you do not owe every person in the world an explanation for your choices. But in relationships that matter, clarity is a form of respect. Providing a small amount of context can prevent unnecessary hurt, speculation, assumptions, and confusion. It allows the other person to adjust without feeling rejected or dismissed. And when we view from this perspective, the practice of boundaries becomes less about power and more about responsibility. Our responsibility towards the relationship, towards the connections we would like to keep, those that mean something to us. The responsibility here is not to satisfy everyone's expectations, but to be able to, and in fact do, communicate honestly about our own limits, where we draw the line and why. From this viewpoint, we are treating relationships as shared spaces, collaborative spaces, rather than battlegrounds. Both individuals in the relationship are free to make their own decisions, draw their own lines. Yet, they both are informed about how those decisions affect the shared dynamics. In everyday life, the difference between avoidance and healthy boundary setting can be quite fine. It may just involve a single sentence of explanation. And that sentence does not diminish or weaken the refusal. So finally, the real skill here is not just learning how to say no. The real skill is learning how to say no in a way that protects yourself while still respecting the relational space that you're sharing with others. That balance might need a few more words than a slogan allows, but it ends up creating and sustaining relationships that are both autonomous as well as connected. Thank you for listening. If this helped, please do share and to leave a comment.